So when it came time to choose my path for undergrad, I thought, well, if performing is something that I want to do for my life or for part of my life, now's the time to commit to it. I lived in New York, performed regionally for close to 10 years. And at the end of that 10 years, my life looked a bit different. It burned out a little bit on the audition lifestyle. I have some wonderful memories, Sheep's Meadow and Central Park, picnicking with friends. But what would come out of giving it some focus and actively trying to help it grow? Because if nothing's ever approved and it's constantly being rewritten, well, then it's never published. And if it's never published, then nobody ever sees it. And if nobody ever sees it, then nobody can form an opinion about it and you are safe.
It's so hard in the early days of running your own business, especially in content, to manage all those voices inside your own head. Your board of directors, as one of my clients used to call them, your internal board. You can't change somebody's opinion by forcing them to change their opinion. You can't change whether they see you as an expert by pointing a gun at them and making them, you will see me as an expert. Now, either I'm wrong or you're wrong. And most people's natural tendency is to believe that I can't be wrong, you have to be wrong. But an interesting thing happens. Once you build a certain amount of trust, people are able to question their own view. If you've ever second-guessed your voice, over-edited your message, or felt like your content didn't reflect your expertise, this episode very well might explain why. Kristen Sweeney is the founder and CEO of Every Little Word, a content strategy and communications agency for expert-led businesses in fields like life sciences, higher ed, and professional services. But long before she was helping clients shape precise messaging and find their voice, Kristen was on stage, quite literally, pursuing a master's in musical theatre. Her love of language and structure and rhythm never left, and it simply evolved into helping complex thinkers make meaning of their ideas. With a background spanning editorial work, ops leadership, content marketing, and internal communications, Kristen has spent the last 15 or more years quietly powering the message behind big ideas and breaking the perfectionism that keeps so many expert-led brands from saying what really needs to be said. I love that bio, Kristen. I love it. I love what you're about, and I can't wait to dig into some more of that. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here.
It's genuinely, it's my pleasure. I mean, we were just kind of saying off air before we kicked the episode off, and before I dive into a little bit of your background and story, that I'm a big believer, although I'm video first, and I always talk about video being at the top of the content pyramid, video very rarely means anything without good, thought-provoking copy that gives it context, especially when you're talking about short-form video. Long-form video doesn't get watched as much. Short-form video is where we're all at these days. But yet, even that means nothing without the right message, the right tone, the right voice, and the right context to challenge our thoughts and thinking and push us on to the next idea. So I can't wait to dig further into Every Little Word and your background. I think it's going to be a phenomenal episode.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. And it's interesting what you were saying, Paul, because I think that, one of the benefits of something like video, we'll just kind of jump right in here, is it does have the opportunity for some of that like personality and charisma and some of the things that can't necessarily be conveyed in writing. Where writing has the advantage, I think, is it demands a level of precision. So I can speak to you and kind of like wave my arms around and make half sentences and you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. And that can work in a virtual, like when you can see me. But when kind of the best of both worlds, I think, is when you combine something that's really precise, really well thought out, super intentional. And then maybe you do add in certain contexts like the extra element. There's a really nice, I think, opportunity for kind of blending both.
Absolutely is. I think they coexist together in absolute harmony. Let's rewind though. A master's in musical theatre. Explain that path to that point, if you would. Like, what did
Sure.
Kristen at school do? What triggered your interest in music?
So it was interesting. I had a very varied background growing up as a kid. I was super academic, very high achiever performer there, one of the valedictorians of my class. And I also had always had an interest in the arts. And so when it came time to choose my path for undergrad, I kind of thought, well, if performing is something that I want to do for my life or for part of my life, like now's the time to kind of commit to it. So I studied musical theater in my undergrad. I got a second degree in medieval studies because that's a great backup for a graduate degree. And when all was said and done, I felt like I needed a little bit more training, and so I went on to pursue a master's at the Boston Conservatory, which is now part of Berkeley, in musical theater. For me, I mean, I it's funny because the work I do now is so behind the scenes in many ways, but I have always loved being on stage, performing, singing, dancing, acting, putting myself in someone's story and helping be a part of interpreting that story, and sharing it more broadly. And in that way, I think there's still some parallels to what I do today.
I absolutely think there is. I can see it exactly. I think it's a beautiful journey. What triggered you to pivot away from musical theatre then? Because surely that's a calling, it's something everybody loves to do. What made you think there was something more out in the world for you to achieve than continuing on in musical theatre?
Yeah, so to be really honest, I think it was partly kind of growing up and some other things I wanted in my life, and partly the path that I had there. So, I lived in New York, performed regionally for close to 10 years. And at the end of that 10 years, my life looked a bit different, and burned out a little bit on the audition lifestyle. I had not made it to Broadway, although I had performed at theaters around the country. And I was in a serious relationship with someone, wanted to start a family. And I really found myself thinking like the about what the kind of for maybe one of the first times, like what is the ultimate goal here? And if you are a theater performer, the ultimate goal is 8 shows a week, 6 nights a week, pretty much
Yeah.
you are waiting to go to work every day. And there's a lot to love about that, but it's also hard. And at that point in time, I was ready to kind of explore what else might be out there, because it didn't for my whole life, it didn't have the same kind of appeal, that it once had had with the other things I wanted. And I ended up moving to Boston. I got married. Now I live in Florida. I have 2 kids. So, life took a different and, honestly, a little bit more conventional path, but I certainly took the long way around to getting there, which I'm happy about.
I always find this interesting, right? When I talk to American guests and when I'm doing a networking with Americans, I always find it fascinating because you guys have such a vast country and all these states that make up the country. And England would probably fit in most of the states in America 4 or 5, if not more, times over. And we think, like in England, like very rarely move too far away from where you grew up, right? Most people grow up, live, work, and die in the same sort of geographical area where you grew up. Some people might move from the north of the country to the south of the country. That's about as far as it gets, or south to the north if they're retiring. And yet I speak to loads of Americans who, like yourself, like exactly that sort of journey. Like, I grew up in New York, then we moved to California, and now we live in Kentucky. And it's like, oh, that's thousands and thousands of miles. It blows my mind as to, you know, I think it's amazing that you've got that flexibility to move within the country, and you've got so many different climates and opportunities and rural areas, suburban, metropolitans. I just think it's a fascinating journey that as a country you guys can have that variety within your lives and actively seek it out.
Special shout out in today's episode for our charity partners, ADHD Liberty, led by Sarah Templeton, who are part of the fight to prevent the school to prison pipeline for ADHD and neurodiverse individuals. If you'd like to find out more, you can visit them. The show links are in the notes below, and I would encourage you to go along and have a look and educate yourself on their fight. It's an incredibly important cause, and we're super proud to have them as charity partners for the Market Pulse Frozen Pioneers podcast. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your episode.
What's been the best part of moving around the country? That, like, what have you enjoyed about the different areas?
For me, I think I really relish new experiences. So that kind of carries over to the work I do today with every time we work with a new client or we're, learning about their business or learning a new industry. So I would say, yeah, just kind of like adapting to that environment and seeing what lessons this particular experience has to teach me.
Complete curveball, but what's your favorite place to be in New York?
I have some very just such wonderful memories. Sheep's Meadow and Central Park, picnicking with friends. Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. I ask because I'm yet to visit America. Like it just hasn't, the opportunity hasn't arrived for me. Like I was working a lot of hours when I was younger. I've got a family now, young family now, and it's kind of, it's on the bucket list. Like I definitely will come to America at some point, but it's just kind of never really happened yet. So I'm always curious to know, you know, as a British person, we see a lot of movies and theatre in it. A
Yes.
lot of America, I find, is, I think from speaking to people, is quite dramatized compared to what's actually important when you get to America. So it's always interesting to hear what people who've lived in different areas, like what your thoughts are on what's important in different, like, for an English person thinking, oh, I want to go to, like, Madison Square Gardens, or these sorts of places, and quite often the answer from an American is something radically different. I love it.
Yeah. I could see that.
Choosing, I guess we talk about your work with today. You choose to work with some very specific client types. What led you on that path to work with, higher ed, professional services, doctors? Why that? Because that's got to be the hardest route you can go to be doing what you're doing, right? That's the hardest ask.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I would say the choice kind of came from looking at what we were doing and where we felt we really excelled with our skill set as a team, with my kind of personal interests. And it turned out that there's this fun and interesting intersection between people who are real experts, have a lot of expertise, and that expertise kind of tends to power their organization in some way. Those people also, often what they're doing could be quite technical, it could be quite complex. And there's usually some kind of tension or struggle to sort of unlock the knowledge that they have and actually share it in a way that then makes sense for achieving marketing and communication objectives. And what we found is that we really excel when we can be that intermediary, um, that collaborates with those experts and then kind of reframes and can help create the content and the campaigns that are um, achieving really specific goals for the organization. And
What
so I would say, like, that's the thing they all kind of have in common in a lot of cases.
what was the point when you decided that that was what you were going to specialize in as a business? Did it start out that way? Did you always intend that to be your client base?
So, not specifically in terms of industry, but I would say it started out that way because my first few clients were doctors, and I was on my own ghostwriting for them. And then we had a long stint where we had a close partnership and we were basically working with probably 50 small manufacturers, precision machine shops. And if you don't think that is complicated, like try talking to an engineer in that space or someone who is estimating a project. So I would say that it was a combination of my personal interest in, I'm super curious. One of our company's core values is hungry to learn. And so this idea of just like always wanting to know more lent itself really well. It felt a little wasted on that curiosity, felt wasted on something that's too straightforward, if that makes sense. It's like you don't really need what I can do really well. And then kind of built the team looking for people like me who are really wanted to take that curiosity from the perspective of actually doing the writing and getting really curious about how those ideas worked and what is the best way to put these words together that's going to convey the message we want to get across.
And so, what was the pivot point for you where, I mean, so one moment you're working musical theatre, that's your life, you've realised that something needs to change. What was the point where you stepped away from that to go and work and get into marketing and explore that?
Yeah. So I would say there is a pivot point, and also it happened gradually. So for many years, the technical name of my business, and I think you'll appreciate this, is called This Renaissance Woman, because it was this giant umbrella for all the different stuff that I did. And that was acting. There's also a whole multi-year career as a yoga teacher in there as well. All the different side gigs that I was working, I've been a restaurant host, I've been a personal assistant, I've been, a receptionist, I've been all sorts of other roles. But freelance writing from pretty early on was always a part of that. And basically what happened is I was living in Boston, and in 2019, I had my oldest daughter. And I came back from my maternity leave, and I kind of like looked around at what I was doing, and you have kids, they change everything, right? So it was an interesting time for me to step back and say, like, what do I want things to look like now that there's this third person in the mix? And what I realized was basically two things. One was that I didn't really want to keep running all over the greater Boston area teaching one-off yoga classes. That schedule wasn't going to work for me. And two was I took a look financially, and my economic engine for the last several years had been my freelance writing, which I was basically paying zero attention to. So I was doing great work for my clients, but not trying to grow the business. And so that was really the moment where I was like, this seems like it can offer me still the flexibility I'm looking for, better financially. I love the work. And so what would happen if I started to actually put my attention onto it? What would come out of giving it some focus and actively trying to help it grow? That was really, I would say, the pivot for me. It was kind of like a slow burn and then a decision all at once.
What made you decide to grow beyond just kind of a one-person team? Because I know for me, like we're a husband and wife team. Like my wife does a few hours a week, which she helps with childcare. I do pretty much full time during the week. And do you know what? I'm not ready to move beyond that. And I've done leadership for 15 years, right? Like I'm jaded with leadership somewhat. I don't have any interest in managing people directly or leading people for some time. And it might change in the future, but I'm really not there yet. What kind of encouraged you to decide that you needed to build a team around what you were doing? Because that's very brave, I think.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would say two things. One, I think that the landscape, even when I did that 5, 6 years ago, was really different. And I think that honestly, with AI and automation and different kinds of systems, I probably could have extended myself longer today than I would have been able to do back then. That being said, when I was a one-person show, there were a lot of things that I could recognize weren't the highest value use of my time. And so the first thing I did is I got a VA, right? And that's like super common hire. And really the tipping point for, oh, we're a company now, was this partnership we had where basically they provided us with a big sales pipeline. So the manufacturing clients I talked about. And they sold a lot faster than I did. And so all of a sudden, I think it was also during COVID. So basically my husband and I were working from like 5 a.m. till 11 p.m. in shifts. And I was just slammed with work. So that's when I made my first couple of hires. And that it kind of happened to me in a way. I'm really glad for it. We've been bigger at points than we are today. We're like a tight, small team today. And I think I've definitely settled into myself more as a leader. But really the impetus was like demand that I could not keep up with.
I just think that's essentially what we're seeing is like kind of that trigger of having that really reliable partner give you the courage to kind of financially just splash out because you knew that revenue could come in as long as you could deliver on it in a consistent way. I like that. It's an interesting lesson for people who are out there that are kind of considering whether now's the right time to take that. Because for a lot of people, they don't have that pipeline and they're almost kind of, do I just carry on burning myself out a bit longer or do I take the leap now? And I think the danger is a lot of the time we take someone on for a few hours per week. But because you're taking them on for a few hours per week, you're not getting the highest quality candidate because the highest quality candidates will say, no, I want 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
or I'm not coming to work with you. And so you end up kind of getting a jaded view of what support in your business looks like, because you're always kind of working in half measures. So it's an interesting twist on that kind of having that partnership.
Yeah, it is. It's, I think it's one of the hardest things in small business is figuring out when to hire and what level of confidence you have you're going to be able to fill that person. And you have to look at yourself if you're the main salesperson and say, like, do I have time to sell and grow this? Because if I don't, I may have to invest. But again, I think that today there's a lot more you can do with systems and tools, where previously we were doing that with people. So I do think there's a little more opportunity to kind of extend yourself, to give a little, to kind of like de-risk financially, that maybe there wasn't a few years ago, which I think is great.
So when you did set out into the content world, what would you say was the thing that was missing the most? You know, what were you trying to solve that you didn't see anybody else solving for?
Yeah. So because I sort of backed my way in, I was a writer who learned about marketing. I'm not sure that I knew at the time. I just knew that I was serving people well. But if I look back on it now, I think it is this expert-led content piece. I don't think because it came naturally to me. I was like, oh, well, if we want to talk about this from this unique perspective of the company, of course we need to be dealing with the experts inside the organization. That was very second nature to me, but I didn't realize that wasn't how it was happening sort of in the industry. That how it was happening was much more generic research, much more kind of keyword focused, broad topics, things like that. Really, content had become almost synonymous with just SEO optimized copy that brings people to websites. And it's so much more than that. So I would say this expert led content piece that really pulls out, to me, it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut to creating something that's unique for the organization. And it's super beneficial because now what you're doing inside matches what you're getting on the outside. There's nothing sillier to me than kind of saying we need to like make up what marketing looks like, but then the whole business is based on you're going to go work with these specific people who have really strong points of view and are going to do things a certain way. Like, well, that's what it should look like on the outside as well, so that a customer feels really connected through that whole journey. And so I find that expert-led content just like very naturally kind of marries the internal and the external.
And one of the things that you talk about a lot is the rewrite loop. Now, I find that concept really interesting because the rewrite loop is something I get clients come to me who are also stuck in the same loop from a video perspective. So talk me through what's the rewrite loop and why is it, what triggers it?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. One, there can be a need for perfectionism. And usually underlying that is fear, right? Fear of producing something that doesn't accurately reflect them, producing something that's not at the caliber of what they need, producing something that is not going to land like a thud, with a thud with their audience. And so I will say there are certain times where rewrites are very necessary, and we'll look back and be like, that client was right. We didn't understand something and now they've helped us understand it. And now we made those adjustments and we know them forever going forward, which is wonderful. There are also times where I think this comes from needing to know the client. And in some cases, it can be helpful to really know yourself as a client. Some clients have to put their fingerprints on everything. It doesn't matter how good it is. It's not about that. It's just how they are. And so I think that's why you have to make sure, like in my role, that you're not taking edits and feedback too personally, because some people are going to change things. You're going to be like, was that small word change really necessary? But it helps give them ownership over this material. I have a lot of empathy for someone who's, effectively outsourcing their thinking and saying this written product has to reflect me. And it's okay if they want to put their fingerprints on it. But so in other words, sometimes it's your personality. sometimes there's some changes that need to be justified. And sometimes it is that fear of being seen and that perfectionism that keeps things trapped, right? Because if nothing's ever approved and it's constantly being rewritten, well, then it's never published. And if it's never published, then nobody ever sees it. And if nobody ever sees it, then nobody can form an opinion about it and you are safe. And I think that while there are many operational blockers to consistent content production, there are also emotional ones that we don't always think about. Maybe because we're dealing with business. And so it's supposed to feel like it's all logical, but we're still human and that's just not how we always operate.
And I think that's the same on our side of things as well, right? Like I remember when I first started, and I still get it, right? This is why a relationship with client is so important, and open lines of communication is so important, and building that trust early days. When a client coming to me and going, oh, that video, the end of that clip just wasn't right, and it's kind of cut me off half sentence, and I'll have made an intentional decision to cut it off where it did, and it kind of felt like you almost take it as a personal attack. But it's right. But I did that on purpose. I think I'm right. And there's this, and then it's followed by, oh my God, I'm going to lose the client. They made an edit. They don't like what I do. I'm going to lose them as a client. I must do this right. And you kind of, there's all these voices going on, and it's so hard in the early days of running your own business, especially in content, to kind of manage all those voices inside your own head. Your board of directors, as one of my clients used to call them, your internal board. It's fascinating. What's your process for building that relationship of trust? Because I can imagine with you working with such an expert audience, an expert client base, then trust's also extremely important to them before they'll even make a move to work with you, right?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a few things there. I think what's interesting is I think one of the baseline things actually goes back to some of my roots in theater. So in theater, I've been in shows with big Broadway stars and big Broadway directors and working side by side with them. That's a whole room full of people who, no matter where they come from, everybody's there. There's a very clear, like, shared goal of producing great work together. And there's also just a very, like, leveling dynamic, I think. You might be totally different levels of fame or reputation or whatever else, but in that room, you're all in character. Everybody has a role, and you have to be able to kind of bring your full self. If you're someone who's in a position of giving feedback, be able to freely give feedback. So a sense of everybody is kind of peers. And so I think because of that background, I've always gone into even, high level executive interviews of major companies. And I've felt like there's a level of peer. I'm an expert at what I do. You're an expert at what you do. We aren't experts in the same thing, but that's why we're here to work together. And I think that in and of itself, rather than feeling super deferential, can start to build the foundation of trust. The next thing really important is expectation setting. I'll never forget, I had a business coach and she was really focused on, this is so funny, like webinars and saying, like, narrating yourself. So saying, I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going to stop sharing now. These small things like that, but then bigger things too, right? Like, here's what we're here to do. Here's the role you're going to play over the course of this interview. Here's what's going to happen next. Here's where you will have a chance to provide input, give approval, leave your feedback, like whatever that their role is, so that they know what to expect. And then I think there's probably two more things. So I'll try and keep this brief. Showing a real desire to understand. So asking questions that dig deeper, not being afraid to engage in dialogue and say, what I'm hearing is this, it makes me think of that. Is that an accurate framing for how I'm thinking about the world? So really being willing to engage with them. And again, I think that goes back to kind of like establishing them as a peer. And then the very last thing I would say, just in general, all clients, is empathy. Thinking about, what does their day look like? And so remembering that when they show up on my Zoom screen, they've carved out time for me amid a jam-packed day of meetings. They've been thinking about 100 other things. And that doesn't mean I need to apologize for being there with them, but it means that I need to, again, kind of like reframe, make sure I'm starting over from the beginning, setting those expectations. It's in the way we send emails, trying to make it really clear. So at a quick scan, because we're one of 1,000 emails in their inbox, what they need to do next and making those next steps obvious, not putting too much mental load or invisible work on them. So even down to like the way we phrase emails and things like that, all of it is really about, and if they blow us off, right? That totally happens. And there's sometimes where I'll be talking with my team and there's some frustration. And I've had experiences where I've said, we aren't the top priority right now. It doesn't mean they don't care about it, but we've got to understand they have whole lives and whole businesses. And we are doing right to follow up, but also like, don't take it personally because it's not about us. It's about understanding them.
And I think there's a lot can be
Think a
said
lot
for
about this,
sales
actually.
approach.
I don't think I always
Yeah.
realize how much I prioritize that sense of empathy and kind of understanding who they are. But that carries through all the way to, the audiences, the end audiences that ultimately we're writing for as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot people can take away from that for a sales approach as well. It's, when, there's a lot of bad rapport on LinkedIn about, people ghosting me. Oh, people ghost me all the time and ghost this, that, and the other. And it's like, you've got to remember what's important to you isn't important to everyone else. Like, it's important to you and it should be important to you, and totally understand why you're stressing about it. But you've got to remember that you are one of 20 emails that they've dealt with today, 10 meetings that they're going to be part of today. He's like, give people a break and let them come back. And some people that's just need a few hours. Some people need a few days. Some people need a few months, right? But show up in the right way. I think you're actually right. That empathy, and you can convey that in. And this is why I love words. I'm absolutely in love with words. I'm not a copywriter by any way means. I'm a very big, I was a very big reader. I was a prolific reader when I was younger. I don't have the time at the moment, if I'm honest. I'd love to. Maybe when the kids grow up a little bit more and I get a bit more free time, if that ever happens, I'm not sure it will. But words are so important in everything. And, right, video is it's an act. It's a transfer of energy. I kind of think of it as like I transfer my energy through the camera to other people. But words they're an art. It's really like it's just the two go so hand in hand and support each other. But even down to the way that you write your emails can impact on someone's day so massively. I'm ADHD, so I'm like, I'm a big fan of why write one word when 1,000 will do. I kill people with words because I want to give all the context. I want to explain everything to everyone all the time so that you can't possibly misunderstand me. And all that happens is people read the first 3 sentences and miss everything else anyway because they get bored.
Right.
And it's so hard for me to stop. Like, Paul, stop. Train myself to do it now. Like, stop. Rethink the email. Do I need to put all this in? Can it be 2 emails? Can I send another email in 3 days? Much as I don't want to, can I send that in 3 days as a separate email so I don't drown them right now? Yeah, okay, let's kind of take a step back. I guess you deal a lot with a similar sort of problem in a slightly different angle. Like, experts get in their own way when they're trying to write stuff for themselves, right? Because they're so knee deep in the detail of the thing that they're an expert at. They struggle to tell the story, right? And they forget that there is a story even. It's, especially if you talk like engineering or mechanics or healthcare, it's very much all the facts and information, and actually nobody really cares, or not many people care about the facts and information. They care about feelings and emotions and the story of how you got there. How do you deal with that side of things?
Yeah. So I'll probably clarify the question a little bit because I think that in some cases, I've seen this with engineers in particular. Often their audience is other engineers and they do care about the facts.
Yeah.
So being technically accurate is super important. But I think what they don't, there's 2 things they don't really have insight into. One is their level of expertise relative to somebody else's and relative to their audience. And that is a problem we all face, the curse of knowledge, right? So, it even happens to me. I'll think like, oh gosh, like I don't have anything new to say about like this LinkedIn post, for LinkedIn. And it turns out I'm like 9 steps ahead of where I ought to be. I ought to be explaining the thing at step 1, because that is still really new and different for people and interesting and educational and valuable. So I think that's a blocker, is just the difficulty in seeing that. And then 2, I think that marketing and communications, they suffer a bit from the everyone's a marketer, you might call it. And so I think that that's partly because we all possess the basic skills, right? We all can write. And some people might be quite good writers. We all, like, we've been trained to be able to communicate ideas. Um, but that doesn't mean that you're automatically an expert in how to do that in a way that's reaching your audience, and all of the thought that needs to go into that, and how that should be formatted for which particular channel. Like, that's a whole different area of expertise. So I think those 2 things can really hang people up. And then I do agree on the personal front as well, or that more storytelling front. Like, sometimes people are surprised that the revealing of themselves is actually the thing that can create a connection and can create an impression. And somewhere along the way, they picked up the idea that they need to be super buttoned up and corporate and kind of separate themselves from the business. Um, and when they try it, they're often pleasantly surprised that some of those personal stories and the things that those are like the experiences that shape the perspectives they have, right? So a story about your past is not in and of itself maybe like a fresh take on something, but it is the fuel for the fire. It's the thing that like caused you to think about the world the way that you do now. And I think people really appreciate that. It's a way to connect.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. And I think too many people are scared of sharing that for various reasons, as you said, kind of whether it's that worry about the perception of others, whether it's the uncomfortable, I don't want to share information about myself, I don't want to be vulnerable, I don't want to give
Mhm.
this up. But yet we're all kind of knocking on the door going, why have I not got more sales? We're emotional led beings, whether you're a technical person, whether you're an expert, whether it doesn't matter. Our core, we're all emotionally driven, and we need to connect emotionally with others in order to like people, to trust people, to see them as a credible expert. And an interesting kind of segue that I always talk about is I was watching a Stephen Bartlett's. I was listening to his book, Stephen Bartlett's book. I don't know whether you guys have much of Stephen Bartlett over there, but he's quite a respected authority here, and he was talking about the idea that you can't change somebody's opinion by forcing them to change their opinion. You can't change whether they see you as an expert by pointing a gun at them and making them, kind of, you will see me as an expert. It's impossible, right? But believe in X, Y, and believe in the Easter Bunny, right? Well, I can't, because the facts tell me that that's not true. So it doesn't matter how much the gun's pressed to my head, I'm still not going to believe in that. But what he posited was, and it's a great example, is that if I see myself as an expert and I start to see you as an expert, and we maybe agree on 95% of things over a period of time, that's great. I start to build trust in you. But what we can't have in our internal monologue is inconsistencies. So if you and I disagree on something, one of us has to be wrong. Now, either I'm wrong or you're wrong. And most people's natural tendency is to believe that I can't be wrong, you have to be wrong. But there's an interesting thing happens. Once you build a certain amount of trust, people are able to question their own view and think, actually, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this person is right, and this thing I've believed all this time is wrong. And rather than you putting it onto them and saying, no, you're wrong, this is the way things are, all you're doing is expressing your own opinion and letting them decide that they might be wrong enough to invest themselves into discovering it. And I think that's a really powerful lesson for a lot of people to learn is, That's the power. That's the real power of trust. And that could be, something like, you need my help in order to make your business more successful. No, I don't. So instead of saying it out loud, we just show them through content and through words and through video and help them understand that we are an expert, which eventually builds that trust so that they reach that tipping point. And let's be honest, that's all our clients who are coming to us for work are wanting support with themselves. So I just find it's a really interesting kind of circular economy. It's all in here and it's all in here.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said about the word discovery too. So not all expert-led content would I classify as thought leadership content technically. But when we talk about thought leadership content, I like to describe, my favorite way to describe it is like, it answers the questions people haven't thought to ask yet. And so there is that sense of discovery and something new. And, to your point about like expert to expert as well, I think this kind of goes back to the thing about empathy, which what expert-led content does too, I think is show a deep respect for the audience, for their intelligence, for their capacity, for what really matters to them. Again, kind of that concept of empathy and thinking about like, what do they really need? And treating them like accordingly and investing and putting intention and thought into the kind of content that's created for them accordingly as well. I think it's it's such a sign of respect and how the company maybe feels about its customers based on what they create for them.
There's so much we could unpack, Kristen. We normally only do 30-minute episodes. We're already at 42 minutes, and I could honestly, I feel like I say this every week. I love this podcast. I love talking to the amazing guests we have on because almost every episode I could go on for another 2 or 3 hours, and we should grab some coffee and discuss some of this stuff offline. But thank you very much for being an amazing guest on the show today, Kristen. If people want to reach you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, so I would check out the website, everylittleword.co, or find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And we'll put those links in the show notes as well. So if you're watching along, they'll be down there somewhere. Have a look through. We'll make it easy for you. Thank you at home for being a faithful watcher of the episodes, whether it's a clip, whether it's the episode, whether it's on audio. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch them. We do this for you. It's not for me. I enjoy it, but it's all for you. And if you've got any questions, if you want, if there's any particular guests, any themes you want us to cover, feel free, reach out over the email or on direct messages. And I would love it. I'd love it if you were able to give us a rating on Spotify or Apple to help push the numbers up even further and reach more people. Thanks for your time, and I will see you next week on Market Pulse Pros and Pioneers. Thanks for joining us for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to feature on a future show, or you've got some ideas for folks who would make a great guest, please drop us a line. Contact details are in the show notes, and I'd love to hear from you. Your host today was me, Paul Banks, founder at Javelin Content Management. Here at Javelin, we specialise in helping busy business owners just like you to repurpose video content, taking all the stress and tech problems away and turning your long-form video into literally hundreds of pieces of content without breaking the bank. We describe it as getting ideas out of your head into video and out to your socials. If you want to launch your personal brand, become the vendor of choice for your audience, or maximise your sales revenue impact, we'd love to hear from you. Join us next Wednesday for the next episode, and don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. Our podcast is only possible with your continued support.